How to get into Vampire the Masquerade. A while back I made a video where I played all the video games in the franchise in an attempt to do just that. Well, we can now safely say I was successful and I really got into the setting over the last year or so. I was very excited for the next big game in this universe. I thought this was going to be the game I could recommend to people trying to get into the setting from now. The most modern, easily accessible entry point where I don't look like a crazy person recommending it. The initial previews for Bloodlines 2 seemed positive enough for me, and even though there were some terrible monetization plans that almost killed the hype right before launch, they were reverted and I was cautiously optimistic. Well, the game ended up being incredibly dull and unexceptional unfortunately, but over the last year I completely fell in love with the World of Darkness, so I still want to talk about it. I played a few other games and I even ran my short tabletop campaign as a storyteller IRL. I have a lot of love for Vampire the Masquerade, and there are parts of this game that I loved too. So this is a review of Bloodlines 2, sure, but I'll also talk about the other Vampire games, the new ones I played, and my tabletop experiences as well. I couldn't really recommend Bloodlines 2 as an entry point, but I still want to leave you with a good sense of where to go if you want to experience the world of Vampire. I will do this in the framework of a review, but it's gonna be a standalone sequel to my previous video, a sort of continuation where I gush about this setting again. Oh, and a heads up, I'll only talk about explicitly spoilery things in the story section later, but there is going to be footage containing spoilers in the background all throughout. Okay, so first, let's start with a gameplay overview. Bloodlines 2 is a first-person action RPG in the sense that there is combat, there are skills to choose, and there are options to pick from in conversations. But the gameplay here is mostly going to be move to a place, there's a cutscene, move to another place, there's a cutscene. Sometimes before the cutscene there is a fight. In an overly simplified way, this is how all RPGs work, I guess. But in this one, none of these aspects ever evolve into something more complex than the bare bones basics. Combat wasn't really the selling point of Bloodlines 1, not by a long shot, especially in the later parts, and I felt like it was the weakest aspect of this one as well. I genuinely found it funny when I had the first encounter. It was kind of charming bad. But then I realized, no, this is going to be it. Your main attack is punching. You don't have any tools, you can't use weapons like in the first one, but if there's something nearby or an enemy drops their guns, for example, you can grab the weapons with telekinesis. You pick it up so it's gonna float next to you, shoot the remaining bullets at the enemy once, and throw the empty gun. You also have 4 ability slots. You get 1 for each slot for your base clan, and you can unlock the abilities of the other clans too. But at any time you can only equip 4 altogether. So every line here is a tier basically, and every clan has 1 skill for each tier. So if you don't do any side stuff and only unlock yours, your build is set in stone. But you can only equip 1 per tier, so even though you have 4 slots, you cannot mix and match the skills you have unlocked. You cannot do 2 from the second and 2 from the fourth. It's always gonna be 1 from each. This really limits build creation and creativity, especially since there's very limited interaction between the skills. I couldn't really find a combination that felt like a real build that clicks together. By the way, this is the full skill tree. Can you imagine if 2 of these were locked behind DLC as it was originally planned? That would have been even less choice. So the base setup, the skill tree, is already on shaky foundations, but the skills themselves are pretty unimpressive as well. There are some abilities that feel powerful, and you can do some genuinely cool combos in some rare circumstances, but most of the time you are going to be punching incredibly spongy enemies, because restoring the resource to use the skills is not even worth it. The skills use blood, and you get blood by drinking from the enemies, but if you want to feed during combat, it will play a literal 5 seconds animation, where your character is aura farming, but the combat is still happening, everyone is still attacking you. You use the skills and then you punch because you don't have blood, but you don't want to get the blood because drinking locks you into an animation that kills you, so you just keep punching, which is going to be boring. Telekinesis kind of helps, but weapons are not always available. There's a passive that gives you iframes, but that doesn't even work in all situations. And passives are on the top of the skill tree. You can unlock them only after you unlocked everything else. So if your you're not that clan, good luck farming. None of these were good design decisions, and they make the combat feel really disappointing. On higher difficulties, even Anarch Thin Bloods take a painfully long time to take down, even though in the story, Fire is a powerful elder vampire. In the very beginning of the game, you yeet a mortal across the corridor, and most characters either recognize you because you are old and infamous, or comment on your powerfulness. But after the very beginning of the game, people will not really bring this up, and socially or combat-wise, it will not really matter. You will have to punch Thin Bloods a million times to make a dent in their HP. It doesn't really support the fantasy of being an elder the story is trying to convey. After a few of these encounters with the bloated HP bar enemies, I had this overwhelming sense of I'm getting better at this combat system, but for what? You never really have to change the skills you start with, so it's gonna be a lot of the same until the end credits. Because as you move forward in the story, the fights don't get more and more challenging, and there's no meaningful XP in the game. You can't really improve in terms of combat stats. The challenge of the combat encounters stays relatively static. The enemies remain the same two types: small guy with less HP, big tanky guy with a lot of HP. There's just going to be a lot of them. So progress actually feels like a punishment, a weird regression of increasingly convoluted fights, where you fight a larger number of the same enemies you've seen before and you are also using the same skills. A sense of progression, of building and improving your character, of succeeding against greater and greater challenges is severely missing. In the 5th edition rulebook, you can't even really play as an elder because they would be so powerful. So playing one here could have opened up so many cool options and possibilities, but in terms of gameplay, this potential was severely mishandled, I think. What is the point of playing as an elder if we never come into full power? Well, it would take longer in universe to recover from torpor, or where you were weakened by your enemies. Cool, what was the point then? I think a passive way of improving is critically absent from the game. For example, for every skill you unlock, you could get a base percentage extra passive damage for your punches, or maybe a separate basic passive skill tree, where you get points alongside the current ones. Currently, there is one passive ability you unlock after unlocking all the others in the same clan. That's the top row of the skill tree. But these are things like crouched, sprint bonus, or an additional blood point restored by feeding. These don't solve the static feeling, the missing RPG aspect, and are honestly barely noticeable. But I guess technically they do improve your base character. The only thing that meaningfully improves the combat feel is when you are fighting mortals, because then you can definitely feel like a supernatural eldritch monster, and it happens mostly around the end, so they will have powerful weapons as well, ones you haven't seen before. So you can use telekinesis in interesting new ways, and if you did some farming, you will have some skill variety to choose from at this point. This part worked, I think, but it almost feels accidental, like these things just randomly lined up for some of these encounters. The fights where you can drink or execute them, you are just punching, are abysmal to suffer through. The boss fights are a great example of this. There are multiple phases most of the time, and it takes so many punches to kill them. So for example, this is a boss fight. Your skills are locked for story reasons, but that means it's literally impossible for you to do anything else besides punching and dodging. I played on easy at this point because I wanted to spend as little time in the combat as possible, but it still took 4 minutes to slowly punch my way through the boss and the ads. The boss fights really exaggerate the problems the combat has, but playing on easy at least makes them take less time. And at least on easy, it feels like you are controlling a real elder vampire. It is fun to be that powerful, and that feeling saved the combat for me. And I honestly don't see the point of trying to do this on the higher difficulties. As it is, even the game tells you that if you want to feel like a true elder vampire, play the easiest difficulty. On higher difficulty, you're just not gonna, and you'll be scrambling against Anarch fledglings forever. Fire just woke up from torpor and is feeling disoriented and weak. I think my ideal path of character feel, a better power fantasy, would be in the beginning you are weak and clumsy as you the player learn the game, and Fire gets back to their full power. But by the end, you should feel like a demigod, mowing down the low-level Anarchs you had trouble with after waking up. At endgame, you should just evaporate the lower power level vampires, just like you did to that mortal in the beginning. This is fundamentally how all RPGs work, and it would have been one of the best uses of using an elder protagonist. But there's no real XP, there's no attribute points, no gear like in the first one. The XP you get only gives you you points you can spend on skills you will never use. And again, after you have 4, there's not really any incentive to even gather more. There's no real progression. The lack of all of this just constantly gives you a hollow feeling in the back of your mind that something is missing. So you can unlock abilities from other clans even though you already have yours, so there's really no need to bother. But if you'd want to, you do it by farming blood resonance points. You can find these resonance events on the map, you started to make them fully engulfed in the emotion you need, and then you try to find a spot where you can drink from them safely. This is a spin on the resonance system from the tabletop, and since we don't really have skills like a tabletop character, at least it was cool to see something implemented. Even if the ordering is different here and here, literally unplayable. So it's different than in the tabletop. Here, resonance points are basically a currency. Each successful drink yields 100 points, and you'll need thousands to unlock all abilities. This wouldn't be much of a problem. You're a vampire after all, you need a lot of blood. I get the philosophy behind this, but all these events will play out exactly the same all the time. You'll make them angry, for example, they follow you to an alley and you drink. You intimidate them, they start to run away, and you just have to hope they run into some alley eventually. There's no way to control these, no way to make them unique or different. I had situations where the person gets bugged or some pathing error happens and the event just stops, and I couldn't find any ways to solve these. Also, the world only reacts to these in incredibly surreal ways that immediately break your immersion. So for example, chasing the melancholic resonance people around, literally no one cares. You can chase them forever. The moment you try to drink from them, which looks like hugging and kissing, I'd guess, everyone loses their shit. Or when you make a choleric resonance person angry, if a cop is nearby, they just shoot him and then they just leave the body there and no one else cares anymore. I guess it takes place in the States, but it's extremely jarring every time, and it happens a lot. There were times when the cops started shooting at the anarchs on the rooftops for no reason, but I can chase around a screaming person forever and they'll not care. It's really weird. If you want to farm out all the skills from these blood resonance events, it's going to be boring as hell, but it's where the gameplay feels the most free in Bloodlines 2. You choose which events to pursue. They're gonna be very, very similar, but you choose how you handle them. There are emergent situations, again, very limited, but you can decide how to react. And it's really weird because the game is neither open world nor free, nor an RPG really, but farming these gave me some faint impression of how it would feel like to play an open world emergent vampire RPG. It's an echo, an incredibly far off one, of a KCD level vampire game where you have so much freedom to do mostly whatever you'd like. But even if these resonance events were just a little bit more, it would help so much. More ways to lure, more ways to CC onlookers, some sort of vendor where you can exchange the points, a thin blood alchemist that can help create potions from them. So it would actually feel like a currency, which it already is. There is just no other use for it besides the skills menu. In the tabletop version, it has gameplay and skill power effects, but here it's kind of just money. To be fair, the outfits you unlock add some sort of reactivity to these. Every skill comes with an outfit that represents the corresponding clan, and people sometimes react to this. If you dress well, it's easier to seduce. If you dress worse, it's easier to intimidate. There's a priest outfit for La Sombra with unique dialogue. I farmed out all of these because I genuinely had fun doing this little slice of freedom, but the base events are still always the same, and you can't really change them. The other way you sometimes get blood resonance points is side quests. Most of these are busy work without any substance. Like, I'm not even being negative. There's a woman who literally says, run some errands for me. And then she sends you on package delivery quests that are basically accepting the quest. She gives you a package, walking to another spot on the map, completing the quest by talking to the addressee. My character is an elder awakened in a new city who wants to prove themselves to the local Camarilla. And their plan is to do this by being a delivery person. I genuinely don't understand why this is even in the game. There are other types of side quests, but from a gameplay perspective, they are equally absurd. Use your vampire senses to follow the scent of someone and dispose of them, but don't stray too far from the scent. If you try to make it fun by climbing the building, the trail disappears. Follow it as intended. Get rid of some troublemakers, find all the hidden collectibles. There are quests where you prevent a possible masquerade breach by killing every enemy out in the open streets. then you run to another location and do the same. Like, in what world is this the solution? But you can choose another. And speaking of the Masquerade, another thing that takes you out of the immersion is the Masquerade Bridge system, where if you do something supernatural out in the open, you will be wanted by the police. But every time, no matter the severity, you can just climb a rooftop and wait it out. They will not pursue you and they will forget in 20 seconds. If you somehow fail to do this, a shadow assassin of the Camarilla will stab you and it's game over. But again, it's so easy to evade the police. I only know this because I purposefully tried out what happens if I let the Masquerade Bridge meter be maxed out. One time I accidentally killed someone during a quest and they started shooting me, so I reloaded the last autosave to do it smarter, but it popped me back to the moment after the kill and my wanted level was just gone. This system doesn't really mean anything in any way. And this goes back to the missing RPG elements. In the first Bloodlines, and to some extent in the tabletop game, you took the Masquerade seriously because there were consequences, or you even lost humanity. And it's very hard to get back, so you will have to reload, or in the tabletop, live with the consequences. But here, it's just cosmetic. You wait on the rooftop a bit, and then it's like nothing happened. Oh, and by the way, there's also no manual saves, only autosaves on checkpoints, so you might need to redo the travel part if it doesn't decide to save. There's no save on exit either, so you have to wait until an autosave to end your session. It adds to how uncomfortable it is to play. There's also no journal for the quests, so you navigate between them by selecting the different markers from the world map. It makes it very confusing to know what you're actually doing. Or if you want to read about the details of objectives, there is the codex with all the terms and collectible notes, but it's more an encyclopedia and not as involved as a quest list would be. There are puzzles sometimes, but it's mostly just pressing your vampire vision and looking at things. There's a quest where you have to, in quotation marks, be sneaky, escaping the police station, but you can just kinda walk out. All the gameplay systems in the game are only implemented in their most bare-bones structure, to the point where I'm not even sure they qualify as systems anymore, but they are technically in the game as a sort of checklist item. And then there are the bugs, or at least there was a lot when I played. I'm not sure how much of this is fixed. Sometimes the resonance event person disappears, sometimes the alley is empty but it still aggrows the cops. This happened a lot to me for some reason, like there were no people around but I got a breach. And then there was a time where a guy just popped in out of nowhere and alerted everyone. So maybe there's out of bounds pedestrians alerting everyone, I don't know. There are weird graphical glitches, UI bugs. I fell through the map a few times. Sometimes telekinesis autolocks uncontrollably for seemingly no reason and then I just die. So on a gameplay design level, the game is incredibly shaky, but on the other hand, it also doesn't run very well. The entire time, the gameplay is such a dissonant mix of jumbled ideas that never really combine together into a cohesive whole. And even on their own, I could only describe their implementation as inconsistent and amateurish. They are all left in, not because they are fun, but because the game would be completely empty without them. Delivering a package is not fun, it's not challenging, and it clashes with the main fantasy of being an elder. So instead of gameplay, we are left with a set of minor inconveniences that are sort of just there. In the first one, you got a pretty good sense of the tabletop version, what the skills do, how disciplines work, and how all of these systems interact. So it was a good intro to Vampire as an RPG system. There's nothing like this in the second. I think it's supposed to be based on the 5th edition, but there's not really any rules that are implemented and converted to in-game. It mostly just uses the lore and the new terms, like blood resonance or the beckoning. The tabletop terms and systems that are implemented are the bare-bones basics of themselves. You will recognize some terminology if you decide to get into tabletop after this, but it cannot really be compared at all. You will not learn anything about the tabletop RPG systems of Vampire the Masquerade playing this game. The Chinese room never really made an action game like this. It's not an easy task to take over an already underway project, and I get that they tried to make it more Dishonored than the first Bloodlines, but it ended up being neither, to be honest. I feel like Bloodlines 2 is built from the ground up on flawed foundations. A game where you play like Dishonored, carefully approaching enemies stealthily, but also use skills and abilities tactically in combat against powerful enemies, while also being a demigod vampire elder, living out a supernatural power fantasy. It's not a mix that was ever going to work. The environments are also not really a good backdrop for a dynamic, open-ended action RPG this game is trying to be. First of all, the whole game takes place in this one very small portion of Seattle. It's always going to be this area, and it's always going to be the same wintry, heavily snowed-in weather every single night. The map itself is not big, and you will not be able to go to any other districts in the city. In actual size with all the verticality, it might be comparable to the first game, but it definitely feels smaller because it's just these few streets and the few shops that are open. Seattle is less iconic than LA, but I don't think that itself is the problem. The first time going into Hollywood and hearing the music is one of the most memorable gaming moments of my life. It doesn't have to be that level. I think even the smaller, more densely packed map wouldn't be a problem in theory. But even though it's not empty, this little part of Seattle in Bloodlines 2 is also static and lifeless. The cars are never moving. I guess it's because of the heavy snow lore-wise, but in a big city like this, it's very uncanny. It was always in the back of my mind that something should be moving here, but all the cars are fixed to their parking spots. People walking around the streets aimlessly, someone standing around in every alley, so as your feeding attempts are more difficult, everyone's nonsensical behavior if something happens. These small things chip away your immersion. They all add up to an overall feeling that people are just decorating here. Sometimes literally they just stand behind the glass like zoo animals or an art installation. There's a lot of indoor environments where people are placed like they are objects in the environment instead of people in it. They are standing still or just repeating an animation loop like Disneyland animatronics.
And yes, I did watch the 4-hour, 18-minute long Defunctland video. Shout out to Kevin Perjurer. You know what you did.
And even if you go back after a while, they will just stand there doing the same thing, having the same conversations. Sometimes it's a flashback to decades ago or a private party, but it's the same motionless guests standing around. Sometimes, just like with the side quests, it feels like it would have been better if they weren't even in the game. Like if these locations were actually empty instead of populated by these puppet people, it would maybe add to the darker vibe, the lonely nocturnal existence of a vampire. Seeing these strange people everywhere is worse than no one being here. And this feeling is present in the story missions as well. When you walk up to a character, it goes to dialogue almost instantly. All the cutscenes are mostly just talking. There's very little animations during these cutscenes and the conversations, and when there are, they are very stiff. People don't really move around, have facial expressions, or have body language, so even the named story characters end up having this lifeless vibe. The same thing was present in Swansong. A lot of people were turned off by the animations, but for me, there it worked because 1, it was obviously a smaller scale project, so I was more forgiving, and 2, the story was actually interesting after a while, so it was easier to overlook. Here, it's just another aspect that adds to the hollow vibe this game has. Remember that Gaben interview about shooting the wall in Half-Life 1?
The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So does this, like, to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices, yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Most of this game is the opposite. The environment is mostly indestructible and you cannot influence it in any way. For example, you can't clean up in your haven. Even just the button prompt, press E to clean and fade to black and fade into a clean state of the apartment would make me feel like I influenced the environment, like I was part of this world instead of just an exhibition attendee. But there's none of that. In some places you can't even jump or attack. You can only walk to the point of interest and listen to the dialogue that's required. It's such a shame that the interactivity never really catches up because the static parts, the environment art is genuinely beautiful. There's so many details everywhere, pictures on the walls, magazines, crosswords lying about, Easter egg signs to find on the street, funny ads everywhere, film references, cute posters. These convey the atmosphere really well. They were clearly put there with great attention to detail and careful effort. And it does work. There are many memorable visuals almost throughout the game. An unquestionably good part where gameplay and the environments intersect successfully is the traversal. Fire is an elder with godlike athleticism, so they can effortlessly run unnaturally fast, climb vertical planes, and even glide over buildings for a short while. This works and is wonderful. As I mentioned before, the Masquerade bridge system is basically non-existent, so you can just sprint and glide and fly everywhere. The enemies that are patrolling a bunch of rooftops for some reason are easily outran, so you can just do this without any downsides. Combining this with some of the skills, you can genuinely create some really cool combos where you feel so powerful. It also cuts down on all the compulsory walking around between quests, so this was one of my favorite parts of the game. There are sections where you control another character in flashbacks, and this person doesn't have this flying ability, so most of these sections will be actually just walking around, and it's painful. It's always walking between the same few places, talking and walking again. Go from Weaver Tower to Aurora Pawn, ask Mrs. Thorne in the Wake the Dead Cafe, ask around in the hole in the wall, ask Lou in the Glacier Hotel. There is a quest that is literally walk to Katsumi, talk, walk to Dale's place, interact with one object, walk back to Katsumi, talk. It's actually insane that this is in an action RPG, because it wouldn't even be fun in a walking simulator. Dear Esther is one of my favorite games, and even I was bored out of my mind during these. The environment art is good, but it's simply not varied enough to sustain this type of quest design. They probably realized this is a problem during development, because if you sprint with the other character, it speeds up the game significantly, and it's like you are using cheat engine to up the game speed. But again, if you have to do things like this to your gameplay to make it bearable, it's probably not a good sign, honestly. And there are such cool environments in the game, and most of the time it just feels like nothing because you do nothing in them. The boring gameplay and shallow RPG mechanics always bring down the environments with them. For example, I really liked Isabella's club visually, and I really liked the mine maze as well. They are cool ideas that are, in a visual art sense, really well represented, but they are not memorable because all I remember is how stupid that boss fight was, or how frustrating it was to fight all those wooden people I can't drink any blood from. The gameplay is so bad it makes me indifferent to anything else. The attempted action destroys the vibe completely. This was really well done in Swansong, where I think they knew they can't really make an action game, so all the fights were social conflict, which is a very unique Vampire the Masquerade pillar, and for me it was such a memorable introduction to the setting. And it probably stemmed from not being able to even try an actual action game, but Bloodlines 2 did, much to its detriment. This will be extra apparent in the ending, which I'll talk about in the spoilers section later. The soundscape of the first game is one of its highlights. Basically every single song from the soundtrack and even the extended soundtrack is a timeless classic that complements the mood of the story and characters and gives it a unique atmosphere that's still unmatched since then. The voice acting was creepy and disturbing, and every single character was at least somewhat insane and off-putting, which again is what most people remember fondly about.
A kindred's gotta keep up with the times. And in modern-day Los Angeles, that means coming strapped.
I don't get a lot of chance to talk to vampires, oh man! Well, other than my master, so I thought I'd just say, what's up?
She seemed lonely, a little scared, so I let her stay in the booth until we closed. She left some stuff here. You seem to know her. Why don't you give it back to her if you run into her?
Hell yeah, I ain't complaining. I'm in a good position to watch it all just slide right down the tubes, you know what I mean?
There are some attempts to mimic the first one's tone with some characters.
I'm waiting for someone. Someone important. I don't want to talk to anyone, especially a cop.
But most of the characters are very serious and straightforward.
I would know of the history between the Anarchs and this court. What is their complaint?
In short, it concerns our treatment of thin bloods. As in most domains, Lou wouldn't suffer them. Under Campbell, though, they were tolerated.
Which is not necessarily a problem in itself. 5th edition Vampire is very different from the older versions. I mean, just look at the style of the lore books. It takes place in modern times, and the tone changed from a grungy, underground 90s thing to a more sleek, contemporary vibe that tries to reflect our present-day reality, filled with cleaner design elements and real-life imagery. Old Vampire feels like playing in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the 5th edition, not so much. This vibe shift is what happens in the voice acting as well, and it's not bad, but it's neither memorable nor unique. The only character I actually remember is Tali, a Nosferatu with charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent.
You know what's really serious?
Educate me.
Those fucking pants. It looked like an accident in a costume store and it's making a bad night worse. We're fabulous. We're gonna live forever and the normies are terrified of us. I won't pretend this isn't a headache the size of a horse cock. He was our little black book of dates and dainties. Word gets out our hard drives limp? That's a lot of unsolicited lick pics coming our way.
Who has a cool base concept, and he's consistently the most interesting throughout the game. Especially the main character's voice felt very dull and too monotonous for me. I think this might have been intentional voice direction, but I still found Fire's voice lacking a real character.
He was not following orders, but still he is the court's sheriff. The prince must punish him herself. The complete draining of one kindred by another, so that the Vitae's power is consumed. Yes, but this? What has happened here? This is not normal.
Based on all you have said, it seems prudent that I meet with Prince Rion. And soon. What is the situation? Is there war in Seattle between Anarchs and the Camarilla? Do not presume to threaten me. It would be regrettable for all of us.
I think playing as an elder might have been a good bridge between the old school Vampire the Masquerade and this new version, because Bloodlines fans already connect to that era. Having a main character that was alive and active during that time would connect the player, the elder, and the old setting and help ease the new one in. But Fire was asleep during that time, so they are as confused as someone who expected a different vibe. So we can't connect Fire to the old setting, it's hard to connect to Fire just in general, and their voice and tone add to this intangible blandness. There is a real standout though, who I can't really consider a full character, but it was one of the highlights of the game for me, and it's the Bet of the Night radio show.
Okay, my darlings, it's time for this gal to get paid. But don't go leaving me high and dry, okay?
It might be familiar if you played the first one.
Hello, LA. You're up way past your bedtime, aren't you? Hope you've slipped into something comfortable. I know I have. If you're new to town or just new to this whole radio thing, you're listening to The Dead of Night.
It was written and performed by Amanda Huddleston, who is a wonderful storyteller as well, and I really recommend the one-shots she leads on the World of Darkness YouTube if you're interested in tabletop actual plays. I really like her narrative style. Bet of the Night is a radio show. You can find it in the lobby of your apartment, and honestly, just standing around here listening to this every in-game night is the most Bloodlines thing you can get from this game. It wonderfully recaptures that uneasy, everyone is insane here feeling of the first game. It was originally her idea to do it as an homage to Bloodlines 1, but the Chinese room liked it a lot and put it in the game. She wanted to capture Vampire the Masquerade as it is today, in the modern nights, and she did a wonderful job. The format is that there's a flirtatious host, and people call in to tell their weird stories or thoughts. It's like a confessional. It's always some suspicious vampire-adjacent encounters with in-universe advertisements in between. And there's an overarching story arc too, where her confident, teasing persona kind of crumbles by the last night, and she becomes afraid about what one of the regular callers is planning. How much of the insanity is real and how much can be discarded. It's a good tool to broaden the game, show the player that there are many things happening outside of our point of view. Seattle is not just our story, but a city that is alive and populated. I love these radio sections. They are unique, interesting, and fun. It really is a shame when it's over and you have to walk out the door to play the rest of the game. So as I detailed before, the city feels lifeless for many reasons, but one of them is the complete lack of music when you're walking around. If you were just walking around in Santa Monica without the iconic music, it wouldn't feel as memorable either. I truly cannot understand why the music doesn't loop. It might be a bug or I just missed some settings, but this silence is a really bad experience during what's already a boring section of the game, which is walking around between quests. And this silence is especially grating because the soundtrack is actually very good. They have some great atmospheric tracks and combat music. For some songs, they even got back Rick Schaefer, the composer of the original game. He did a Q&A video about his experience a while back when this project was going to be something else, and his perspective on the music is very interesting. And the Q&A itself is like a radio show from the game. It's nice to listen to.
Loved it, so I didn't really have to worry about being anything but myself. There's been a very few games like that. Dark Age of Camelot was another one that I was able to just do what I wanted, and that was great.
Some tracks are remasters or remakes of the old songs, and when they play they add so much to the walking around sections. And he apparently made a new theme song as well, a reimagined version of the old one that didn't make it into the game. You can find it on YouTube, but I'm not sure how final it is or how DMCA this is, so I'll not play it. I really liked it though. The game tries to hit the nostalgia over the head a bit too much for my liking though. Sometimes redone versions of the old songs play, which feel completely out of place in this different environment.
Son of a bitch, this fucking plane. This is my money, so fuck off.
And they even put a jukebox in your home to play the old songs. Guys, remember the music?
I clapped when I saw it.
Sometimes even the sound gets buggy though, and I'm sure this is fixed by now, but there was a constant bug during resonance forming where the victim, regardless of their appearance, did a high-pitched anime girl moan. At least that was really funny. The sound has the same problem as the previous topics I mentioned. It doesn't mix with everything else. So the music very often doesn't fit the mood, even though the music itself is good. The sound effects for the combat are good, but combat itself is a mess. And sometimes the sound is bad. So the moaning bug, or when you hear cop cars sometimes, but there are no moving vehicles in the environment. There's no cohesive vibe, no sense of intentional direction, and I'm never really sure what the game is trying to communicate to me, so playing it is always deeply confusing and not very satisfying. The overall story of the game, the plot, is by far the best part for me, but that is, I think, mostly because I like this type of body horror in general, and Sabbath stories in Vampire are also very close to me. It does have really great moments and some interesting twists, so I want to go through it and its characters in a bit more detail to look at where it works and where it falls short. This will be the spoilery part. If you want to avoid those, you can continue from the next chapter, which starts here. So the game starts with the main character, Fire, waking up from torpor, a hibernation-like state where they spend a lot of time in. There is a mysterious mark on your hand and you hear a voice in your head. Fire doesn't remember where or when they are, and the base premise is that you will need to figure it out. Your character is a very old vampire known as the Nomad throughout Vampire Society, but they will be calling themselves Fire in Seattle. You will be able to customize them to a fair bit in terms of hair and accessories, and there have been a few patches that add further options. And as I mentioned before, there are no items, so the only way to change the outfit you are wearing is to unlock skills and their corresponding outfits. There are not many options for clothes and you cannot mix and match individual items, but I did find a few that I really liked and was happy with. I think the visual personalization is good for a game with a pre-established character. You can choose a clan in the beginning, but I didn't really find any significant differences between them. Besides a few dialogue lines, there's not much difference. Like at some point I was video chatting with my La Sombra character because it was a set event in the main story. your clan ultimately will not affect anything. You quickly meet the local Camarilla, as is custom. Lou Graham is the de facto leader of the city, but she is not the prince. That was a guy named Cambo, and after he got killed, now it's Ryong, a younger vampire who's also basically an underling of Lou. In the beginning, there's a lot of expository dialogue that is quite awkward, but they got through the basic concepts fast enough so it didn't really become a big problem. Some other games do it in a way where you can read about the vampire terms in the codex entries, but in a bigger budget game like this, I think this more explicit way of introducing the player was fine. There are also XY appreciated that type notifications, but I don't think they significantly mean anything. If someone was annoyed or bored by what you say, it mostly affects things that are not immediately present. So for example, it might unlock an ending or some new lines of dialogue hours later, but the main progression of the story and the scenes will be very similar between the options. So these always feel cosmetic, and like they are just there because a character-heavy RPG should have them. Maybe it was done so it's easier to keep up with everyone's attitude, because we do have a lot of characters. Lou is very old-fashioned. She is from another era. She has some very archaic views and ways of speaking.
Quite extraordinary, the number of sins you can blame on mental health these days, but still. First Campbell, now me. Those vile anarch socialists are growing bold. She has drawn in the weak-blooded and the foreigners and dug them deep into the bowels of this city.
She's set up from the start as kind of a red herring person behind everything. She's obviously very powerful and protective about her power. She constantly seems to be scheming and lying all the time, and she's a very obvious candidate for the main antagonist, pulling the strings behind everyone's back. Ryong is her child and is very young, maybe too young to lead the Camarilla in the city, but we will end up working for them for a while. We are mostly concerned with the mark on our hands, and for an exchange of information, we're gonna do some random tasks for them. They have a lot on their hands. Thin Bloods causing problems, Anarchs causing problems, a second Inquisition investigation, the sheriff has gone crazy, and there's a mysterious serial killer that the voice in Fire's head seems to know a lot about. That voice turns out to be Fabian, a Malkavian vampire and a detective at the Seattle PD. He was kind of a secret insider for Lou and the Camarilla inside the police. When the nights end and Fire goes to sleep, we get Fabian flashback sections that usually take place decades earlier, same few streets of Seattle though, and show some added context to the characters and places. These are hours long, and the story background information is kind of interesting, but it's delivered in an incredibly stretched out dialogue structure that's really hard to follow. The dialogue just loops in circles forever, and since you can't really make meaningful differences with your choices and their lines meander endlessly, it was always a struggle to really get into these scenes. And the gameplay is, and I cannot emphasize this enough, nothing. Fabian is a Malkavian, and sometimes you have to use some Malkavian abilities that only he can use in the game. Every single situation like this has one skill out of the 4 that can solve it, and you cannot choose the wrong one. He will just say, no, that won't help here, until you press the correct one. Even the investigative ones, where you have to pretend to be someone else, if you choose the wrong dialogue option, the interaction just resets until you choose the right one. It's mind-numbing. It's like the package delivery quests. Technically, I'm playing a game and doing something. I'm pressing a button on my keyboard, but I have no real input, no agency to fail or choose anything else. People will not react to my actions. It will hold my hand and steer me into the only possible option every time. One of the skills is talking to inanimate objects. That's at least interesting. He constructs a persona for the dead body, the filing cabinet, or a piece of paper, and uses that persona to talk through his own line of reasoning. He seems to be aware that these are just his own creations, but he uses his Malkavian heritage to further his progress as a detective. It's a cool idea that enhances his unique characterization. But as a whole, these sections never feel like you are role-playing as him. It's always just experiencing his story. You can never fail, your inputs don't matter, it doesn't let you choose the wrong one. And there is an incredible amount of exposition and dialogue flooding you at all times. You can't jump, you can't glide, you have to run everywhere. And the Fabian sections that take place in the past have this very rough 1920s Instagram filter that just further deteriorates the already boring sections where nothing is happening and you're just learning about people through extended small talk. You will have to make it through one of these every day, but even as Fire, you will still experience this "I'm just an observer here" feeling in the way that the side characters behave towards you. You can go to them between main missions for activities, but they will always be the same. Hunting for Nico, a package for Mrs. Thorne. Sometimes they comment on recent events for a few sentences, sometimes they just repeat the same lines and send you on the current iteration of their quests. You don't really have any input, you can listen to these interactions if you want, but nothing really changes either way. There's flirting and romance in the game as well, and I'm not a dating guru nor a vampire, but I don't really think flirting is like this.
You interest me.
In a you want to trace the contours of my face kind of way? Or in a you get chills when you contemplate the depth of my vision kind of way?
Both.
Oh, you mean you want a bone? Maybe. I don't know though. I need to do some visualization.
This again, I felt like actually takes away from the game. I genuinely cannot take this seriously, and the whole game would feel more grounded and sensible if this just wasn't in it. It's not surreal in a charming way as Bloodlines 1 was, where the irrationality was part of the world building. This is just empty. You click the heart option a few times, and if you've done that enough, you'll get the chance to hook up with them. But it's just a fade to black scene, and not in an interesting, showing you just enough kind of way.
I was hoping I would get to try you, Patience.
Follow me.
You are mine.
Let's try here? No, here, wait, here, yes! That was new. Not bad, Elder, at all.
My reaction to most of these was ok. And by the end, if you press the heart option enough times with enough of them, you can just hop from one to the other, but it's just a repeat of the fade to black scenes, so the game manages to make being a slutty vampire boring, which is honestly quite an achievement. The only thing that actually for real feels intimate and flirty is the way you unlock skills. In the tabletop rules, you have to drink the blood of a vampire who already knows the skill, and in the game it's the same. They can refuse to let you drink directly and will give you the blood in a vial or glass or whatever, but sometimes they allow it, and most of these were done in a way that is a believable interaction two people have. It is rooted in being a vampire, and just in general, it works way more as intimate relationships than the actual romances. The most involved romantic relationship you can get is with Sophia, and it's because she's an important character in the main story. So while working for the Camarilla, you meet her as the awkward science girl who idolizes Fire based on their reputation. You can be very flirty to her or straight up rude, but the main idea will be the same. You spend a lot of time together, just the two of you, and Fire puts a lot of trust in her to help them figure out the mystery of their mark and how Fabian got into their head. In the flashback sections, Fabian is investigating a serial murderer, and it ends up being connected to our present predicament as well. In the end, Fabian finds out who the killer is, Campbell, who was the prince and an underling to Lou. So it was a power play all along to keep other players in the Seattle politics in check. Fabian awakened Fire as a last act of defiance, and the Elder in the torpor-induced frenzy killed both of them. Fire completely drained Fabian and absorbed him into themselves. And in this case, Fabian just remained fully conscious inside Fire's head. Campbell is just deleted. But the mystery goes even deeper. Someone was talking to Fabian before every flashback section who called himself the Gardener. We end up finding him underground, imprisoned, where it turns out Lou put him. The Gardener turns out to be Fabian's sire, who has completely lost his mind in his underground prison. He was too close to finding out the truth about Lou's secret machinations. Her best idea was to just bury and seal this whole section of Seattle with Gideon inside. We get a sewer section here with terrible fights against copy-pasted monsters, so don't worry, we have all the ingredients for what made Bloodlines 1 Bloodlines 1. Horrible parking lot fights, and now stretched out sewer fights. Perfect. We also slowly put together that it was Sophia who was plotting in the shadows, behind even Lou's back. Lou was very self-assured in her power and her knowledge in all things Seattle, but Sophia and Gideon with his powerful mental abilities formed a plan to get revenge on Lou. The original plan was to let Gideon escape through putting his mind into Fire's body, but Fabian's actions changed everything. Gideon dies by Fire's hand and Sophia goes complete revenge mode. The Sabbat, let's say, doesn't really care about the masquerade, so Seattle becomes a mess and we find her in Ryong's office, where we are going to be trapped. Ryong is scared whatever you do, you will not be able to prevent this. I really like when the Camarilla suffers high-stakes losses. The whole organization kind of works like a 1920s mob family, and with these type of executions, Camarilla stories are brought closer to this parallel. But I liked her character and would have loved some way to influence this outcome. Fire is also pushed into the sun, but Fabian sacrifices himself, uses his last piece of power to move Fire's body, crawl into the shade and give Fire a chance to fight back. We get a Fabian section here again, and I really dislike a cutaway sequence in a pivotal narrative moment. It's one last bittersweet round around the city, talking to the side NPCs, the last night of Fabian. And this is where we learn that he was successful in his investigation, he did find the killer. And I bring this cutscene up because it's a great example of how important the Nomad is during gameplay, and how weird it feels that my character is infinitely cooler in a cutscene. Just one-shots the Prince of Seattle, it's not even close. But when I control Fire, we have to punch Anarch fledglings for minutes. Whatever. The flashback ends in a scene where your two characters talk next to the tree Fabian's been seeing in his mind. You get to control them both as they talk. This scene was genuinely emotional for me. The voice in the head storytelling is very hard to actually pull off, but I think here it worked. I actually liked the dynamic between Fabian and Fire. His voice acting performance was great, and for me the writing found the perfect line between annoying stereotype of a noir detective and funny sidekick who helps us untangle this mystery in a strange, unfamiliar modern world. This culmination of Fabian's story worked in my opinion and was my favorite part of the ending. Because unfortunately after this the momentum sort of fizzles out. The visual of Sabbat Sophia is wonderful and very memorable, but she ends up being one of the worst boss fights I've ever experienced in any game. Remember how I said that the main problem of the combat system is that you can only really punch, and anything you try to do besides that, skills or weapons, are incredibly awkward, the animations are floaty, it looks bad and feels bad to play. Okay, so with that in mind, what Sophia does is she teleports around the arena, she summons adds all the time, and she also has multiple health bars. If you thought that bar fight with the mannequins was a train wreck, you are rewarded with an even bigger one for making it to the end of the game. I guess it's Bloodlines tradition to have a terrible boss fight where you just want to use God mode and be through with it, but like maybe this specific aspect should not have been followed. And after this at the endings, the lack of word reactivity finally culminates in a slideshow that at best is underwhelming, at worst it's painfully black or white. For example, if you tell Mrs. Thorne you'd be a fine prince one time, she becomes the prince. Okay. If you kill the second Inquisition commander, the city will get swarmed with agents, no matter what else you did. She is terminally ill and during the main quest asks you to turn her. Your only two options are kill her on the spot or turn her on the spot. Fire even says embracing her would be against Camarilla rules and would put Fire in danger for a woman they just met. On the other hand, killing her is suggested to be the heartless option for some reason. You even get guilt-tripped for it immediately after. And you can't really talk about the nuances of the decision to Lou either. You can bring her in for the court to decide, saving you the responsibility. Only these two incredibly basic choices. And if you choose the one the game thinks is the wrong one, you automatically get the bad ending. Also, all the endings say the Sabbat attack will be covered up as some sort of industrial accident, but like, it looks like this. Everyone has phones nowadays. It would have been interesting to know the logistics of this cover-up. How exactly are they doing it? Like some really high-level mass manipulation, some sort of hacker or bot network to counter the evidence, but honestly, the endings barely change. Maybe a few slides and sentences are different, it doesn't really matter. With this last beat, I left the world of Seattle quite disappointed. Even though the story is a bit convoluted, I like the reveals, I like the mysteries, I like the complex politics and high stakes, but it unfortunately doesn't have an ending that ties everything together nicely. There were so many good art pieces and really cool visuals in this game, cool music, interesting characters and story beats, and it never really clicked together for me. I think when I say I liked Bloodlines 2, I'm saying I like the idea of it. By playing it, I like thinking about what it could have been, imagining a version where it actually works. I like the Sabbath story, I like the characters, I like the idea that you play as an elder, but nothing interesting is done with any of it. The things I'm doing or saying don't really matter, the relationships I'm building don't go anywhere, I don't feel like I'm choosing anything. I think these are much bigger problems than the game not being Bloodlines enough. I think I could live with it being very different, but a good RPG. But as it is now, not a particularly good game and not feeling like Bloodlines, it's extremely disheartening. Sometimes characters from Bloodlines 1 are mentioned or they show up. Sometimes the old music just randomly fits the situation perfectly and the game that could have been just pierced through for a fleeting moment. The story lands a joke, a scene is well written and feels impactful, the environment design is memorable and beautiful. These things happen in the game, but they happen randomly, inconsistently, and in the center of such an immense amount of boring sludge you have to get through that it's going to be hard to stay focused on the positives. For example, the serial killer mystery is really interesting and the leads are picking up. You are getting into your investigation, it's exciting what you will find out next, so you go to the location. You need to get to an elevator to figure out the next clues. However, Tolly is sitting outside this lift and he will only let you in if you get 3 pieces of information for him. Obviously, these are at 3 different points of the city and they have no real relevance to the thing you are doing. So you have to leave what you were doing and start your trek across the map on foot. It serves no purpose, it's just some padding for no reason. It genuinely feels like a social experiment to see how much the players can take. For my last video, I've spent a lot of time dissecting Dragon Age the Veilguard and how it ended up being such a colossal disappointment for most people. Bloodlines 2 turned out to be incredibly similar in terms of its long development history with full development restarts, key figures leaving left and right, and an end product that by the time it came out went through so many hands it completely lost any sense of cohesive vision a piece of art should have. I will not go into the development history to that extent again, because I can't do this to myself or to you, dear viewer, 2 times in a row back to back. But I think it's still interesting to look at the previous versions the game had and what we know about them. The game was originally being developed by Heartsuit Labs, a Seattle-based studio. Brian Mitsoda, lead designer of the first game's story, was working with them. Rick Schaefer was working with them. I remember the public perception around the time was cautiously hopeful at best, because even then it was obvious something was going on behind the scenes. The game was delayed a few times and Paradox was not happy with the progress. It's obviously not public, but from what's available, they were not happy with this version of the game and they did not have faith in the studio to actually finish the game. They tried to change management at first, but ultimately the studio was fired and Bloodlines 2 seemed to have been internally cancelled. There was an extended gameplay demo shown at E3, and it's the most detailed look the general audience has of the game, so maybe we can use that to guess what happened. So in this version we were Thin Bloods, basically the lowest power level a vampire can be, on the bottom of the social hierarchy, quite far from an elder. The other big difference that's immediately obvious is the RPG elements. There's lockpicking skill checks, there's loot, there's skill check options for dialogue, and it's not just a rephrasing of the same thing 3 times. The combat looked much more similar to Bloodlines 1. There's weapons you actually wield, and it frequently shifts to a third-person view that makes the gameplay vibe also very Bloodlines 1. It's not the cinematic finisher effects you get locked into as fire. It's more an awkward angle that shows the janky animations of some actions. And these animations are rough, but in a weird way it's kind of endearing. So for example, the drinking animation is just straight up bad, but it actually adds to the correct vibe a Bloodlines sequel should have. You can eat rats from the ground, you can dance horribly in a club. These are iconic, bad animations that people remember, so even if they don't look good objectively, I think they would have worked. And the vibe of the city is much gloomier as well. It's not as heavily snowed in as the blizzard the finished game has going on every night. The lighting is more muted and dim, and there are cars moving in the distance, so it feels more lived in. And as much as I liked Fabian as a character, I really like the moody silence this demo has. There are ambient city sounds, there is faint music, but there is no guy in your head constantly ripping one-liners. All of this makes this version of Seattle feel much closer to the dark, creepy vibe LA has in the first one. There are some familiar faces, but these were completely different people in this version. The haven you have is kind of the exact same that Fire will have. And there's fast travel available notifications, so this version at least solved all the walking I had so much problems with. Don't get me wrong, this looks boring as well, but my point is the atmosphere is much better. I feel like a janky, unpolished but lovable mess would have been better than a polished but ultimately very shallow game. I mean, Bloodlines 1 was a mess on release and it was mostly fixed by mods. It's very clear from the insider reports that Paradox was not happy with this version though, and especially not happy with how slow it was coming together. There's a trailer that says release Q1 2020. That date ended up being a little bit off. We'll never know for sure what went wrong behind the scenes, and they might have had the vision down, as you can see in the pre-rendered trailer, but they never really got close to realizing it. I think if you are a corporate executive without any understanding of the first game or its fanbase, looking at these animations and all the jank and looking at all the money being spent and how far off it looks after 2 delays, it must have been panic-inducing. I think corporate prefers this type of sleek, smooth exterior the Chinese Room's version has and wasn't really interested in the details about the Legacy or Bloodlines 1. I think the announcement trailer for the developer change captures what the game should be like. So this is already the Chinese Room, the combat looks the same kind of Bloodlines 1 janky even here, but the vibe is very dark and broody. The trailer editor understood what the modern setting is and how to capture it, even if the game ended up not quite succeeding in this. In the previous version, you played a Thin Blood and learned the vampire lingo just like you did as a freshly turned kindred in Bloodlines 1. The Chinese Room changed this to an elder, so Bloodlines 2 wouldn't rely too much on the story beats of the first one. They wanted it to be its own thing. This wouldn't be a bad thing if handled well, but I already extensively talked about how this failed. They explicitly set out to make the game a smaller area and make it denser, and as the PC Gamer article points out, this worked well for another franchise, where the first game's immersive sim elements were scaled down a bunch in the new games, but it still worked really well. Now that it's after release, we know that this is not the case here. I think in hindsight, it's easy to say the Hardsuit Labs version was going to be better, but maybe if that shipped the way the trailer suggested it was, most people would have thought it to be outdated and too janky. But knowing the alternative now, I think I'd prefer that. Bloodlines 2 was a commercial and critical failure, and even shortly before the release, Paradox was already saying they are done with RPGs. It was pushed out the door to recoup at least some money after all this time. We can still look forward to the 2 DLCs that will come out later that might incorporate some of the feedback. But until then, we are left with a very disappointing sequel, and we should look for somewhere else to experience Vampire the Masquerade. Okay, so what to play instead? For my previous video where I played everything, I made this chart and I still think it holds up. It's not a tier list or a value judgment, but a recommendation guide based on how familiar you are with the setting. For example, I think Swansong is one of the best Vampire the Masquerade games, but it's not a good game in the general sense. There's no combat, only social combat, but it's handled so perfectly for the setting I remember it very fondly. But the overall structure is so convoluted and the puzzles are nonsensical most of the time, you will most likely need a walkthrough guide to succeed fully. And just the quality of animations and the game feel are really not up there, but the vibe is impeccable. So you'd need to have an already existing connection to the lore and the world to have the motivation to put up with its quirks. But I guess that's how I was able to kind of enjoy Bloodlines 2 as well. Nightroad is a text-based game, a choose-your-own adventure book basically, but I still feel like it captures the vibe of the setting the best. It gives you the overall best experience because the story is good and there's no tedious gameplay to detract from that, which is the case for Bloodlines 1 and Swansong. I go through all these games in detail in my previous video, you can check it out if you're interested. Since that list, I've played 2 vampire games. One is Bloodlines 2 and I'd put it somewhere here, maybe in place of Bloodhunt because it's shutting down in April. If you recommend Bloodlines 2 to a beginner to the setting as their first game, they would sour on the whole thing pretty quickly, I feel like. The other game is the third game in the New York games called Reckoning of New York. The art improved a lot, the UI is different again, and overall I really liked it. These games have a tendency to have the quirky millennial type of humor in the writing, but I think in this one it was more cute than annoying. The story was really fascinating, I liked the endings, the characters, and the new art style as well. Overall, I thought this was their best one out of the three. The whole bundle is frequently on sale for very cheap, and I think this is also a good entry point to the modern day Vampire the Masquerade. If you have a tolerance for the occasional Kirk Chungus millennial joke, I think it's worth a try. I also played Heart of the Forest and I liked it. I even read some parts of the rulebook and it's really cool, but I feel like I'm fundamentally missing some sort of furry affinity to really get into Werewolf the Apocalypse. The World of Darkness is really vast though, so I'd recommend looking around the different properties if you enjoy Vampire. There's some really cool stuff here. I've also found some comics. This series was incredible and I felt like it captures the setting really well. The other one is Kindred of the Night, that is a webtoon. I'm not even sure if this is officially licensed or whatever, but I thought it was a fun take on Vampire in this very stylized art style. I randomly stumbled upon the fact that there is a Bloodlines 2 art book as well, but honestly I didn't really like it that much. It's just character models mostly. There are some funny images, but that's it. I also realized from here that the area we're in has names for its separate sections, so a Chinatown for example. But I never even noticed it, it's so insignificant in the game. I remember delivering a package there though. And my last recommendation, and I cannot emphasize this enough, get into the tabletop version. Literally just buy the core rulebook and read through it. You can force your friends to play with you, which I did, but there's also so many groups online. I think the best way to have an experience you want out of Vampire is to create it. And it's not even that intimidating. This was my first time being a DM and it went completely fine. And I also feel like I learned a lot about game design and gained even more appreciation for people who are doing this for a living in the process. The rulebook has a section that says you can create your own rules, so if some rule is too complicated for your group, you can just ignore it or do it differently. The main point is that everyone has a good time, and there's a million complementary books to the core rulebook too, so it's easier to get into the topics you're interested in. And if you like the old atmosphere better, the old rulebooks are also available, just play those. Until we have some truly remarkable, just objectively good in every way Vampire games, I feel like this might be the best option. I did my original trying to get into Vampire video years ago at this point, but I feel like I was really successful. I did get into it. I've read a lot of the physical books, I played the tabletop game, I know the lore much better now, and I feel like this setting is a core part of who I am. My ideal Vampire game would still be a Vampire the Masquerade Disco Elysium-like, but even now I feel like I have lots of options to truly enjoy this setting the way I want, even if it's not through Bloodlines 2. Okay, so that is the video. I'm really sorry things are taking so long lately, but I'm having a rough time IRL. But I realized that for some reason the Mass Effect 1 soundtrack specifically makes me lock in, so I managed to make it happen. I try to work on videos as much as I can because I have so many ideas I'm excited about. I'm also going to try to make them relatively shorter like this one, so there's hopefully not gonna be another Dragon Age incident where I upload once a year. I took on a new trigger warning job where I have to go into the office more, so I have a bit less time, but I feel like I'm really excited to work on these ideas, so it's gonna be fine. Thanks for hanging out here, for commenting, for subscribing. You can also watch my other stuff if you're interested. But anyway, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.
Okay, rats. Time to earn your cheese.